And I believe every practitioner needs to have some kind of energy work in their practice. This is what I'm going to say. Maybe it's, I'm ahead of my time. I don't know. But if we're not looking at the body as energy, then I think we're failing the other person. Einstein even said the best way to solve problems is creativity. So if we're programmed into one way of living all the time and our world's so black and white, are we actually going to be able to open up and solve problems in ourselves and the world if we're so linear, let's say? And the quantum world has 0 ways of being linear.
Welcome to Harmonic Alignment, a podcast that explores the new frontier of energy medicine, bridging the gap between Western medicine and quantum physics, giving you easy and practical solutions. Guided by me, Dr. Larisa Sharipova, and me, Priscilla Koblenz. Join us on a journey discovering your harmonic alignment. On today's episode of Harmonic Alignment, Dr. Larisa Sharipova connects with Dr. Ann Shivas, who is the founder of LifeLift. Dr. Ann blends her personal healing journey with expertise in epigenetics and the quantum wave living method to guide individuals toward health and self-discovery. After overcoming soccer injuries during her pro soccer career and burnout, she transformed her life by reprogramming her beliefs, habits, and understanding her primary needs based on her genetics. Dr. Ann is a pioneer. She is passionate to share with the world how epigenetics is affecting human behavior. She is helping us understand the unseen energy that's at play, which is one of our favorite subjects on Harmonic Alignment. Dr. Ann is training practitioners to understand the science. It isn't woo anymore, the power of energy at all levels. This is a fantastic episode. You're going to love it.
Welcome to Harmonic Alignment Podcast. Today I have a conversation with Dr. Anna Shivas. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Ann.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. It's been wonderful connecting with you.
We kind of have similar work that we do, so I'm very excited to talk to you about different things that I'm also passionate about. Your journey into healing and wellness is deeply personal. You were a professional athlete, and so what led you to research and explore epigenetics as an epigenetic specialist? You consider yourself?
Yeah. So, I live in a mesomorphic body, and I was going through life with just big ups and downs. So like being able to perform and then totally crashing and so on. And it led to not recovering properly. I was making some really poor health choices as well when I was in that world. I was drinking, and I was in my 20s, and there's no excuse for that. People in their 20s right now are way smarter than I was, but I was drinking and I got super addicted into taking Advil all the time to cover up for it. My environment was like just creating a menace out of my body, really. What I was doing to my body, there was going to be an expression at some point that was not going to benefit me. And from the other side of it, it came down to the point where I went to this guy who was more of like an alternative healer type and more naturally living. And I was on 2 things. I was on birth control and I was taking loads of Advil. Some days I was up to 8 a day. That's a lot. And he said, you're going to have kidney failure or liver failure when you're young. And because you were on birth control for a certain duration of time, you're really under risk for Graves' disease. And he did a magnetic scan on my body. He said, you're 26 years old and you're developing cancer cells. And so that day when I walked out of there, I was like, that was enough. Because I knew going in, something wasn't right in my body. You can feel it. And, my cycle was out of whack and so on. And I was burnt out, and I'd probably been on that cycle 10 times before, right? And I share this as a practitioner because it's like, okay, we all had these aha moments in our life, and people come in to see us and they're like, oh, you're doing it all right. And I was like, nope, I wasn't at some point. And so when we start to work with people, and like, you've been on your journey too, it's like important that they know we've been on that journey, and that's what makes us the experts in our field, because we had to go on the deep dive. Because, well, I was probably at the end of the tunnel on that one, where I was like, okay, it's dark down here and I have no idea how I'm going to get out. And so I had to start with the simple things. Epigenetically, you know, we talk about nutrition, we talk about environment. Who was I hanging out with that was, you know, promoting this lifestyle? I had to really scrap an old friends group, like, bless them, but it wasn't benefiting me. My choices in that group were not great. You know, we'd go drinking, partying, get home at 5 a.m. Like, that's not what was benefiting me at all. And so I had to do a whole reshift of myself. And I would say come the age of 30, I was starting to feel really good again. And then I was like, why did I make those choices? Why was I so programmed into making those choices? And that's what started more of that quantum journey of my own programming, my own energy. So there's kind of two parts, like the body part, and then the part of like looking at my own fears, looking at my own patterns of why I was nurturing myself that way, which was not nurturing at all. So that brings me to what I do today. Let me tell you, it's been a journey. I'm grateful that I'm alive without any chronic disease.
That was happening while you were professionally trained as a soccer player, right? You were
Yes.
like having fun with your life because, first of all, you train a lot. You already increase your cortisol or your stress because of a lot of practice. And you were drinking and doing all other things that also increase stress and inflammation in the body. So accumulation of different things created the effect.
My HbA1c at some point, so for anyone that doesn't know, it's an inflammatory marker. It was off the charts. Like, it was insane, off the charts. I used Advil to sleep too, because I couldn't sleep. I was masking the pain and I was trying to get to sleep. And for whatever reason, Advil makes me sleepy. So that's the path I went down. But, you know, I have had 2 knee surgeries on the right knee. I didn't rehab the proper way. I did the work to rehab. The work wasn't the problem. It was what I was doing in my environment that was a problem, and how I was treating myself. And so you're right, my cortisol was through the roof. It was more in my ligaments that I was noticing it. So in gene expression, we talk about like different body types might express different things under chronic stress. And then, you know, you add in university, and I had jobs, and yeah, at some point, I guess I had that some kind of pattern in me when I was younger that I thought I was kind of inferior to everything. And I'm like,
I think you're not alone.
yeah.
Most of the people like, oh, we can do it all, and we do all this and this and this, and like, yeah, it's create inflammation because we overdo certain things. It's like a stress bucket. Sometimes we born already with this little bucket, and when we accumulate emotional stress, physical stress, environmental stress, and bucket become full and start spilling the symptoms. That's when we have symptoms and sign of that something is wrong with us. And some people have it early and some people have it later. Depends what genes we were born with. So you mentioned epigenetics. Let's define what's epigenetics for some people who still don't know what it is.
The easiest way I explain it to people is, so you're your unique individual. You're you, I'm me. And in the same scenario, if you were in the same room looking at a painting on the wall, we might see something different. Meaning our expression would be different based on how we're programmed to view and see the world. If you and I stand in a freezer together, one of us might get colder faster than the other. Same if we go in the sun, one of us might burn faster than the other, or so on. So all of these are gene expressions. So it's you and your environment. Epi is above and around, and genetics is us, right? And so that's the word broken down, is how you express in your environment. And now there's so much out there that we can get so individualized, and we have to get individualized. And you and I both know this, right? It's like anyone who's going for the standard blood test, I don't even go there anymore. It's like, let's actually learn about all your symptoms. Yes, we'll get some bloods, and yes, we can get some other stuff going on. But the deepest part of it for me is, what got you there in the first place? What were the patterns of your programming and your expression that led you to this? And that was my big question for myself. Okay. So why did Dr. Ann go down just complete self-destruction mode? when I was younger, and, ended up really hitting a wall. Not one, not two. It took me about 3 times to learn. So why did I do that? What was I proving? What was my pattern behind it? And so people will say, well, that's psychology. And I said, well, no, because I'm programming my body as well as performing something. So we can't break the psyche from the body. Yeah, everything is expressing at once, right? So if I get stressed and I yell and I'm angry, that's going to also create a chemical reaction in my body as well, and a cellular expression. And if I'm doing that all the time, what's the longevity of that? What's going to happen to me when I'm programming myself with that anger over and over? And how do we break that? And so a traditional system, and it's not to knock any traditional system, but it says, well, let's talk about it. Let's talk about where that pattern came from. Okay, great. And so let's say maybe I had a very chaotic childhood, right? And in my mind, it was chaotic. If I had a twin, they might not see it as chaotic. So people have to know it's not about blaming your parents. It's about your perception and you taking accountability of how you chose to view this world. And until somebody gets that in them, get past the blame, get past the victimization, and be like, this is what I'm choosing to live, and I have the power to change that. And so in a way, a long roundabout answer, that's epigenetics. And I love to tell people how powerful they are to actually change their environment and view it differently. I don't need to be a cortisol freak anymore. I was in the past super addicted to my own cortisol. Why? Ask yourself why. And then when you answer that question, ask why again and why again and why again. And you keep going deeper and deeper and deeper into your own expression. So it's really all about our own accountability of how we want to act in our environment. We happen to our living, right?
A lot of research now done about adverse childhood experience. Is that contribute to how you live your life later on? What do you think about that?
I did a stint with police officers and PTSD, okay? And this is where I learned that you can have 2 people in a room and they can walk out of the room with a different experience. And we're talking life and death here, right? So that can be fairly stressful for a person to go through or see or deal with. And they'll walk out with a different experience, because when I started interviewing these police officers, same scenario, okay, same crime scene, let's say, and they come into the office and they'll explain the scenario differently. So that told me already, perception of environment is going to be different based on how you've been programmed from ages 0 to 7. Now, I like to go a little bit further, because I've had some patients that have come to me and said, well, my whole feminine line, my whole mother line has the same patterns, and I'm here to break it. Okay, great. That's some wonderful self-awareness. But again, that's your perception of it as well, right? So you're choosing to carry that through based on the fact that you're recognizing and seeing that. But we can exchange that out. You can break that family pattern. Does it help all the generations behind you? I've been asked that question. Does it help mom? Does it help grandma? Does it help great grandma? And, I think it does, because every time you exchange out an energy, it'll change the way you're interacting with your universe and your reality, no matter what. So if I choose to yell or laugh in one scenario, that's going to change a reaction of a room, right? It's the same when we exchange out an old pattern of, as that family woman line, of not valuing yourself, okay, or self-sabotage or something like that. You can exchange that out. And when you go and interact with your mother again, it might feel different. There might be a different scenario. So we can go there. I think the self-awareness is there of people, but they don't necessarily have the tools of how to actually consciously exchange it out. And you can do it in an instant. And exchanging out pain, exchanging out how we view pain in our body, exchanging out even what's the basis of a disease. We break down the word dis-ease. You treat the disease with, we can use the quantum work, we can use epigenetic work, we can use genetic testing, what have you. But what's the deeper pattern of how it got there in the first place? That's an expression in itself too. And people will say, well, this disease just showed up. And it's like, no, you created it. It didn't just happen to you. You chose to host it. Why is your body hosting this? And so I like the question, why? And knowing the fact that they can exchange it out for something new.
Do we need to go deeper and deeper and find out the reason to work on issue, or it's not necessary? Can you do like on an energetic level just to clear energy or shift energy without knowing why?
This is a good question because I've had people that said, well, I did a Reiki session and I felt really great after. And sometimes that does work for people. But and my question is, okay, did it stick? Or are you falling back into the same pattern? Because if you're falling back into the same pattern, then shouldn't we become conscious of what that is for yourself? Because when you're operating in your own body, your Reiki master is maybe not going to follow you around everywhere. So to me, it's giving that person more self-empowerment to say, I'm conscious of the fact that I'm self-sabotaging in this scenario, and I'm doing it again, and I'm recognizing it now, and I'm breaking that pattern. So sometimes I guess the energy shift, as people would call it, is helpful in that moment, and they feel great walking out. But in my experience, getting so specific and down to the deeper patterns is important, so they know they're not going to keep repeating the same cycles in their reality. And some people will even say, oh my gosh, I've been repeating this my whole life and I didn't even know. And it's like, well, now you know. And we can exchange that out. The tool that I use is called a frozen age. And I'm just going to put this out there. Have you ever been around an adult who acts like a 2-year-old when they're not getting their way?
Yeah. We're stuck in our kid age, right? Our children's age, and we behave that way. Yeah.
Totally. So that's a pattern of them being stuck as their 2-year-old self and knowing only to react like that in that sort of way. If they want to keep that reaction pattern, fine by me. But if it's along a line of saying, okay, you're depressed over here, and we backtracked it to that 2-year-old pattern, wouldn't you want to exchange that out? And so that's where we say they're frozen at that age. And so we say they're frozen like a 2-year-old, like a 10-year-old, like a 20-year-old, however it is. It's not good or bad. It just might not be benefiting their living. And as humans, don't we want to, mature in our living and be wise in our bodies and really know ourselves? I think there's a lot of empowerment in that. And so I would suggest somebody to melt that frozen age and grow from it and mature from it. You can operate differently. That was exactly my cortisol line. I hadn't grown out of a childhood trying to prove myself scenario. And I'd just been repeating it. And don't get me wrong, I loved playing pro soccer, it was amazing. But I'd been repeating it over and over and over again. And had I kept going, I'm not sure I'd be alive today at all. I was like jumping off mountains and doing just really extreme things because I was addicted to getting that cortisol high. That was a pattern I chose as a child, and I had to change it.
So you need to become aware to change your patterns. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
Because you cannot change something that you are not aware, or it's hard. You can change energy and shift like from negative to positive, but it's not gonna stick, as you said. And as long we're aware that we need to change something to do something, or why we are doing it, then we are more willing to change our behaviors.
Yeah. It's like when we get triggered, we go into that fight, flight, or freeze state. And when people get into that state, they're frozen somewhere. And so that's a really good way to recognize yourself. And, that stems from the amygdala, right? So your brain's being like, I'm not safe here, even though in reality, you might really be safe. So what is the fear response hardwired into you that you're reacting every time you get into a state? Like I had women who couldn't be in rooms with men, right? And gosh, will we coexist with men in this world? And yeah, okay, maybe you're not safe in every scenario. I get that. But just in a room, in a circle, sitting there, that fear sits in the body. And we have to draw awareness to that to make that change. And then they get a deeper sense of actually, okay, I'm expressing this pattern. I'm expressing this fear. My nervous system's overwhelmed. And that allows that consciousness to come through. And that's how I explain consciousness. There's a lot of different ways to explain consciousness, energy, healing, quantum, etc. And like I said to you in the beginning, I like to practicalize it. It's very practical. And however someone wants to take it, is fine. But recognize your pattern, shift the pattern, and then reprogram yourself. It's that simple to me. Yeah. The process is simple teaching it because I'm not in their body. But when someone else is going through this, and I say it because I've gone through it. I've gone through all my patterns, and I still practice this on a daily basis. I wake up and everything in a way is an energy. So if I had a dream, okay, what was the meaning of that dream to me? That's my subconscious telling my conscious mind, and this is what you're living in this moment. If I killed myself in the dream, I probably want to look into that. Just saying. I haven't, thank goodness. So that means I want to live. Woohoo. People have just wild dreams, and there'll be other people in the dreams. The thing is that the dream always represents ourselves. So say there's like an ex-partner in the dream. That's just a part of you that you got to look at, right?
It's holding it, right?
Yeah.
It's in you, and it's affect your emotions, and emotions represent in a dream, because that's how subconscious shows up for us in the dreams.
And people will say, well, no, my ex is like entering my life again and so on. I'm like, well, yes, in a way, maybe not in the material world, but in your mind, yes. And like you said, what's the emotion behind it? How did you feel? And how did you perceive that dream? And then that's the pattern that we need to go in and exchange. So that part's really cool. And there's other ways we can do it as well. It's not just dreams. We can look at pain in the body. Because I started off as an osteopath, right? And so I was working actually with a lot of pro athletes, funnily enough. After I cleaned myself up and I got on my own journey, I was like, I know how to help you guys. And really, you know, why would they go to the extremes to carry that pain? Why would they keep training when they were in pain? And so a lot of it, I had to go back and say, okay, there were patterns around trying to prove yourself, or feeling the need to achieve something, or needed to be seen or heard, or like, it's not bad things per se, but the energy's got to come from an authentic place rather than a place of like neediness or prove. And because it'll change, you know, how we actually interact and heal our bodies. So when I did talks on them with that, they were like, right. And I saw and listened to a lot of wonderful athletes who had a very abusive childhoods. And so they learned to abuse their bodies in different ways. That's a pattern that they believed was real inside them. They could tell themselves, well, I'm not going to live that. But until you get into the deeper patterns of realizing that it's actually playing out in your life, and that becomes a reality to them, and sometimes a bit of a shock, like, whoa, didn't see that. And when you exchange it out, the performance for them actually becomes fun again. Right? It becomes fun and joyful. And why am I here? Because I just want to be in my body and perform. That's a much healthier way than beating ourselves up, right?
Yeah, I think the awareness is the first step to healing, right?
Yes.
And when I did a mindfulness program for myself, because I noticed that something is going on, and like all the subconscious and patterns, I start looking in my own patterns. So why I get triggered by some specific type of people. So this is probably my reaction to like my ex-husband, because he behaved similar way. So I was very defensive to certain people, because I saw the pattern that is not everyone, but certain people. So yes, you become aware and you try like, why did it react this way, right? And you talking about energy exchange, what does it mean and what's the process of?
So the best way I can explain it to people is everything in this world is made of energy. Even your chair, right? It's matter, but it's just a stagnant matter, and it's showing up differently in our material world. And so humans are energy as well. It took me a long time, by the way, to conceptualize this, coming from a very scientific brain world. You too, hey?
Same thing. I have to read a lot of books, and you know.
Me too. I was like, is what I'm doing, is this actually going to serve the collective, or am I totally out there in this, I'm going to call it woo-woo world? Because I liked the woo-woo world in a way, but I'm like, how can I ground this more for people to understand and put a process on it that people can go through so that they can deeply understand themselves? So to explain it, And this is how I do it. I'm not saying it's the best way, and maybe I'll morph it into something better as I keep going. And I'm training practitioners right now, and it's going really well because I'm like, hey, if I can train practitioners and our practitioner brains, because we're definitely wired in a certain way, if we can conceptualize and get change in people, we know we've made it. And I believe every practitioner needs to have some kind of energy work in their practice. This is what I'm going to say. Maybe it's, I'm ahead of my time. I don't know. But if we're not looking at the body as energy, then I think we're failing the other person.
Even functional medicine, integrative medicine practitioners, they look in energy as a biochemical mechanism, cell of the energy of ATP and mitochondria.
Yeah.
But actually, we're not only cells, we are much deeper. We atoms and electrons and protons. That's what make the energy frequencies.
Yeah, exactly. And I used to be like that, by the way, because I was into genetics and epigenetics. And I was like, oh, everything stops at mitochondria. And it doesn't, because when you break down all of that, like you said, we're electrons. An electron spins twice and actually sends out a wave. And so if people can picture this, we're trillions of electrons spinning and sending out a wave of energy. Where does that wave go? It goes out into a source. And this source is storing matter. Some people call it the universe, some people call it source, some people call it God, some people call it the sky. I mean, I've heard every name. To me, it's all a source. Whatever you want to call it is up to your belief system. And in that source, we know that there's dark matter and light matter, and how they interact is actually unknown. But we do know energy can't be created or destroyed. So it goes out, gets stored, and then constantly reacts with you. And so an energy comes in, spins, goes out. Energy comes in, spins, and goes out. So hopefully people can kind of conceptualize that. Let's put that on a bodily level. So right now I have energy coming in, spinning, and going out on many levels. I'm speaking, I'm thinking, I'm looking at you, I'm moving. Like, think about how many waves are going out of me and then how many waves are coming in. And I like to call that information, because it's information in motion. Okay. And it's going to go out and get stored and come back in. Now, there's a third part to this. So think like a triangle in a way. There's my body, there's my source or my universe, and then there's my purpose, because every person has a unique individual purpose on this planet, and no two people will see the world the same way. So that interaction with your purpose is happening all the time. Does this align with my values? Does this feel respectful to me? So those parts are important. And usually your purpose is underlying of an acronym called BATH waves: beliefs, actions, thoughts, habits, words, attitudes, values, and emotions. And all of your purpose will lie under those things. And what those are, your values and your purpose, that's a whole nother story and unpacking that we can do. But for the sake of the quantum work, it's knowing that you're constantly interacting with everything around you. So for example, if I came to this call and I was really angry and frustrated, chances are
you would make me angry and frustrated too.
Probably. Exactly. Because what I'm putting out there will always get mirrored back to me, because you're an energetic being too. Okay. So for example, people who get nervous around dogs, the dog gets nervous and bites them. And it's like, hang on a second, let's look at everybody here. The dog's reacting to the energy of the person as well. They're both interacting, and they manifested that dog biting them so that they could get a message of maybe making a change. If you don't like what's happening to you, change it inside yourself. I think there's another one, and this might ruffle some feathers, but karma.
Yeah.
Well, karma will get them. Well, yeah, if you believe that, maybe it will. But if you believe that something's going to get somebody else and there's a maliciousness behind it, guess what you're manifesting for yourself as well. So if there's that retaliation or whatever the energy is behind it, it's like you're creating that for yourself because you believe in that. And people will say, oh, I didn't see it that way, right? So this is the programming I want to get people out of. We don't need to be malicious. In fact, we don't even need to be competitive. We need to be more community oriented, for sure. And I've learned that coming out of the pro sport world as well. And we don't actually need to live in a place of blame, complain, denying, defending ourselves and so on, because these are all learned ways that are going to keep us stressed. Women are really taught to serve others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't have time to even think about ourselves. Self-love, self-care, that's what I advocate for women. Because if you don't do that, you cannot do for others as well.
So that's the key to the quantum work. If those women learn how to truly care for themselves, the care around them is going to change because they're interacting with that. So let's say the kids are quote unquote high maintenance kids, right? Or needy kids or what have you. Kids are energetic beings. You know, they haven't even decided their patterns until the parents instill them and sprinkle them with loads of patterns, right? I'm not a mother, but I've taught a lot of kids and I used to be a teacher. And when my energy was off and wild, kids were wild. And some people say, well, it's a full moon or whatever. And I'm sure that has impact as well, but they reacted to me all the time. Okay. So they're just representing in me my own feminine or masculine creativity. Okay. They're representing the little girl, the little boy inside of me. Right. What moms and dads and everybody need to do is say, okay, that child's reacting in a wild way. What am I doing to connect to them? And what am I living right now? How is that reflecting in me? Because there'll be something in there that that parent can exchange out to do differently. And when that's exchanged, the environment changes. The epigenetics of our life, quote unquote, changes. That's why I still call it epigenetics, because yes, there's our environment around us and us, but we're in charge of all of it.
So how to do exchange? So we need to recognize the patterns.
So there's a method. It's getting all senses involved. And so the method is they have to say out loud. Usually I sit in front of them so they see someone mirroring it to them. And then they have to touch all meridian lines of their body because we want every cell and wave of their body engaged. And then there's something that we say. They say, I face and embrace that I've been self-sabotaging myself. And they touch all the meridian lines and I'm ready to replace this and every cell and wave of my being. And they're like, oh, okay, I feel some tinglies or whatever. They're exchanging it for themselves. I'm not doing it for them. I'm doing it with them. And I think that's important because a lot of healers do for, and it might get someone started on their journey. But at the end of the day, if they want to be totally sovereign and empowered in themselves, they have to do it themselves. I've tried many ways and that's the best one that's worked. And so to replace, we put it around our antenna. I always think our spine is like an antenna to the universe. And so we circle our spine and replace with something we want. So what would we want instead of self-sabotaging? Well, we want empowerment. We want enlivening. We want expressing our true desires, right? And so when I do this method, I choose words that are very particular to the person that I put in. So I would say something to you like, what does empowerment look like to you, right? And I don't know if you're open to answering the question, but what would that look like to you in your life or your patients' lives? What do you think?
To have freedom.
Yeah.
Have the best relationship with my children. That's empowerment. And be an example for other people.
So that's funny because this is epigenetics as well. Your words of empowerment might look different to even mine. Sure. My words of empowerment might be like, I just get to say whatever I want, whenever I want, and I'm not judged for it, or something like that. So it's really interesting when we put empowerment, we need to know that that means something different to you and me. So words in this are really important. And then the energy behind the words that we put in. So there's a lot of discussion that goes on between us of, okay, let's put in empowerment, but like, let's actually get clear on what that looks like to you as well. So you're starting to reprogram yourself. You know, you really value your relationships with your children. You know, you value how you give to others, right? And show up to others. And so those are three things that I know are in your values, and we'll start to program that into you as well so that you manifest and live that more, if that makes sense.
And you said they're all different because it came from my past experiences. So
yes. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So it's come around full circle.
Yeah.
I love this chat, Larisa. Thank you, because you're the person that's actually asked the right questions to dive in the deepest. And one, I feel really comfortable sharing with you. So thank you for creating that space. But it's really interesting because I know when someone's been on this journey a bit because they know what that would look like and how it kind of works. These ways are like newer and coming into the world, and we're the pioneers of this. And it's important that we have these discussions so people can get a picture for what they're about to jump in and experience, right?
Yeah, and for most of the people out there, it's kind of a new concept. So for us to make it simple for them to understand, I think that's the best way for people can experience new methods, therapies, and some kind of interesting things that we're doing now, specifically in the quantum space, which is very, very new.
Yeah, it is new. And then it's not. I was like, how can I pull old work to explain to practitioners, because that's who I'm teaching now, that it's not actually that new. I suggest that people go read about Milo Wolf's work and they go read about Einstein's work. And Einstein even said the best way to solve problems is creativity. So if we're programmed into one way of living all the time and our world's so black and white, are we actually going to be able to open up and solve problems in ourselves and the world if we're so linear, let's say? And the quantum world has zero ways of being linear. In their work, not that I understand the mathematics behind what Einstein does, but I understand what he was saying of how a human needs to live. And Nikola Tesla says the same things too, but his purpose was different, right? Has applied himself more into that like engineering type side. And here we are taking the quantum work, but we're applying it to the mechanism of the human body. So the quantum world is unlimited and it can be applied to whatever somebody's really interested in. I'm interested in humans thriving, and that's what I want them to do. So I was like, well, if this is going to create humans thriving in their communities and open them up to new ways of creating and living and inventing, then great. Because again, we come back to that purpose that no two people here on the planet are here for the same reasons. Let's really get real with ourselves and get into our purposes. And I'm sure we're going to create amazing things. That's the bigger picture.
Yeah. So quantum physics, I call it now quantum biology because I relate quantum physics to the human body, and that's what become quantum biology. So I guess you more on a communication level, how people relate to each other. That's what you implement.
It's definitely self-development. Why I've put it out to practitioners is because the biggest complaint practitioners had was patient compliance.
Yeah.
And they were still going through all the lab tests and they weren't getting the changes they were looking for. And I said, until we get down to those, let's call them all belief patterns or habits and change those, we're not going to get a change in the person. And so I call it epigenetics and transforming people's habits, because that's really what it is. They learn about who they are, the body they live in, their values, their purpose, and then why they're not living it. Really. And so we want to consciously transform that so they go out and actually interact with the world differently. And I'm going to be quite honest, is socially, it's really interesting. Like you said, when people change their internal energy, their world around them starts to change. Like some said, well, I've lost some friends. And I said, is it losing, or are you opening up other opportunities to create the connections that you actually want to create that are going to really benefit you moving forward on your purposeful level? A lot of people think they're going to lose something or change their whole life, and things do change as we do shift. And I think there has to be, some trust in that and gratitude for yourself, because maybe you're going on a path that you can break a cycle and actually transform yourself to give back better to this world, if you will.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I lived for 25 years in unhappy marriage. When I started growing myself and learning about myself, so my vibration got higher and higher, but my ex was the same level. So we were drifting apart, as people say. One person is changing and one is stayed the same. And now our vibration is not resonating. And that's why we start having fights and everything else. So apparently it was fall apart and end up with divorce. So now my vibration is high and I'm start resonating with people who are in the same vibration. That's why we're losing some people who are on a low frequencies. And if you go like with emotions and everything increase and your frequency increase, you're resonating with other people. So you acquire a different crowd, you acquire a
Yeah.
different community. And that's what's beautiful. You always can change your energy.
Yeah, and it's not like we're leaving those people behind. At the end of the day, in this quantum work, everyone has choice.
Mhm.
Even if someone's listening to this and they say, I have no choice, you still have a choice. You have a choice of your thoughts, your beliefs, your habits, your behaviors. You have a choice of all of those things. And all of those things are going to interact and create your material world, right? So we have a choice. People say, well, I don't have a choice in addiction. Well, then I would say, well, why are you going for the addiction in the first place? What's the pattern behind the addiction? And so I know as human beings, there's lots of things that we can just toss in the garbage and don't need to live. But then when we look at the bigger picture of life on this planet, everyone has their own choice and journey of how they want to live it out. And it's not up to you or I to say, you have to do it this way. It's their choice at the end of the day. And so, like you said, people will drift apart. It happened to me as well. When I was engaged to get married, I really started deep diving into my personal development, self-development. I was growing. I was like, I don't need this old stuff anymore. Alcohol was a big one. I don't need alcohol. And then realized that alcohol connected my relationships. And so I thought, wow, toss that out the door. And a lot of friends just didn't show up anymore. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. And then, like you said, now I've developed a wonderful group of friends and just beautiful practitioners from around the world who are so like-minded and like in tune. And I'm thinking, this is awesome. I look at it as a journey of life. This is the path I've chosen, and this is what I'm here to help people with. And it'll resonate with some and some not. What we're here to just help people do is live better if they want to. Yeah. And if they're happy in their old space, then great. Be happy there. Yeah.
People are not ready to change. And I think because they didn't reach the pain point yet, or maybe they need to learn lessons by continue this pattern.
Actually, it's funny you say that. I was going to say, usually people have a big life event and then I meet them after. There's a life event and then they're like, oh, maybe I should do this work for myself. It takes that kind of aha moment and then they show up.
I know you mentioned some body type. There's 6 body type based on our pattern.
So that's actually the intro to the quantum work. It's the stepping stone I use is there's 6, I'm going to call them endocrinology types. And endocrinology is really around what hormone cycle is feeding your mind. Again, you can't cut the head off the body, folks. So it all relates. So we have, an adrenaline type, which I happen to live in that type. Go figure. We have our oxytocin type, a prolactin type, a serotonin type, and then we have a noradrenaline and dopamine type. Now, this will relate into the body that somebody lives in. You have all the hormones, but if you're more primary prolactin type, that person will carry a little bit more weight, have a larger bone mass in their body, and in fact, they have a large intestine. And so what does prolactin do? Prolactin to the mind naturally has them caring for others before themselves. That's what happens, when a mom gives birth and breastfeeds, she creates prolactin. And so there's these types on the planet. And I've had, practitioners argue with me about it. And I said, look, if we measured all of it, their prolactin would probably be a little bit higher than their adrenaline and so on. That's why they grow into a so-called bigger boned body. Whereas if we go straight across the board, we get a slimmer body, we get a more frontal lobe driven person, we get dopamine. And what's happening? The dopamine and brain driven type person, super powerful brain, that's you. And, and then you get a slimmer, slender person because where's all the energy going? To the brain, right? So the body matches the mind. And that's the first step when people come into this program because they need to understand the body they live into and naturally how they would see the world, because I believe your purpose lies in that. You've chosen this body, you've chosen this mind. You have so many talents in this body of yours. It's important that you know them. If you're the oxytocin type, you're going to be out there socializing with everybody. If we lock the oxytocin type up and tell them not to socialize, they're going to get sick and they'll feel depressed. So it's like, are you putting yourself in the best environment for yourself? And then we go into the patterns of what's really holding you back from being authentically you all the time.
Very related to genes you're born with. So that's your body. So you have a more dopamine in your body because you have more dopamine receptors or oxytocin or cortisol or prolactin. I think that's a genetic base. So it's our biology, but learning about it, we can change our patterns based on that.
Yeah, and what your greatest strength is also your greatest weakness.
Mhm.
So we can get people with very high dopamine, they might be down that addiction path. And then I
Yeah.
would say, okay, let's break that pattern. And that's when we go into the quantum patterning. What have you patterned in your body your whole life since you were 3 or 4 or something? Got to find the age of why you need to go for alcohol every night. And they'll say, well, it calms my brain. Okay, why is your brain so overactive in the first place? And there's a lot we can do around nutrition, exercise, and so on. And I think that's up for other practitioners to do. But the quantum work is like, let's break the pattern so you don't even feel the need to have that alcohol anymore as well.
What would it be helpful for that person specifically?
We have to go back into, again, their frozen ages. So I use a lot of muscle testing. I go back and find that frozen age and then say, okay, what happened at this age and so on, because it could be this unconscious stress pattern and energy that they're living that's making them anxious. And then, overactive brain, and then they want to go to calm it down. So that's why they'll choose something external. So they actually don't know the full circle yet. And when they come into the deeper parts of themselves of why they're choosing that in the first place, of, again, those frozen ages, it won't be one, it'll probably be many. And they'll just have to keep going through it until they start to repattern new belief systems in them that, okay, I don't have to be the anxious child anymore. And how many people come to you and say, I have anxiety? Like they identify with it. They love it. They want it. So they create it. If you keep telling yourself you have it, you'll find it. Our wording is so important around that because we'll create it.
We put labels on ourselves. Oh yeah, I'm depressed and this is like who I am now. It's like become deeper in our brain, in our field.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll look for it. And then we'll manifest other depressed people around us. It just goes on and on. So that's where a whole tool comes into play, where we can take you through your scenarios and say, okay, let's take you from, 4-year-old pattern up to your age now of all the times, that you're living this. Like there's so many patterns we can go into to understand why somebody's going for that binge eating food. Yes, it's a gene that's on, but when we go in and repattern it, they can actually turn that gene off and they won't binge eat as much unless they recreate the pattern in their life again. And so they can recognize that.
You mentioned wording, right? How you word and affirmations. So that's all involved in the repatterning?
Yeah. So they get their own personalized patterns. Okay. No two are the same. There's generalized ones which society lived, which I've created tools for that they can just use them generally. But when we go in one-on-one, it's to their deepest core pattern. And we want to go into their deepest belief system of actually who they think they really are, and they're probably not. We create a new pattern, and I want to call it a new frequency, not an affirmation, because they have to physically put it into themselves. Affirmations to me are like you say it out loud and you hope for the best. But when they've specifically put this pattern in, we also have them look for where they're living it in their life. So they're perceiving it in their environment. Guess what I saw today, Anne? I saw love in my life. Great. That means you're living it, right? So we add on that part, and then we add on their purpose. And so at the end of a program, an individual program, I create a recording for someone, and it has their purpose at the start, all their personalized patterns, and their purpose and values at the end. So if they're having an off day, they come back to that whole recording and they remember, okay, I actually don't need to be falling back into these old patterns again. It does take some time for the transformation and they will have to repeat it. But like anything, it takes time to transform ourselves. It's not necessarily overnight.
How long does it usually take?
Well, the practitioner's program is 12 weeks with a lot of depth to it. And so the practitioners will get about 4 or 5 sessions doing these replacements together. They work on themselves in the program, which I think is important because if they're not open to it, no one else will be open to it coming to them for this work. So the practitioners after that, I still continue to help them. But what I find with practitioners, they know the body so well anyway that they pick it up pretty quickly. When I'm working with an individual or a group, I've done group settings where like we do those generic ones that I was talking about, and people still get growth from that. But again, they'll have to come in and do the individual work for themselves with a practitioner at some point, just to have their own personalized patterns. And that could be anywhere from a 6-hour session, and I've worked up with people to 2 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Actually, my longest client is probably 3 years. But in saying that, there was a lot going on in that person's life and a lot of cleanup to do and a lot of transitions to make and a lot of repetition. So if people choose not to repeat their patterns to reprogram themselves, they'll be coming back to me. So it's kind of like how much work they want to put into themselves and commitment. But you know, some people want to come back and just work with me, and that's fine. I don't mind, but sometimes I'm repeating myself and just have to be patient about that. But then others are more independent and they go off and actually want to make the transformation on their own. So again, it's kind of like personality perspectives on that as well, and the needs of that.
Are you willing to give us any examples of the client that you work with?
Well, I've had athletes, loads of athletes, because I was in that world for quite some time. I've had drug addicts on recovery. I've worked with a lot of military and police officers on their PTSD patterns. I've had a few suicidal folks who've tried everything and they've even gone down their genetic path and they haven't quite got there. So they come in and they want to repattern that belief system out of them of like, I don't want to live anymore. And we want to get them living and thriving again. I've had even women coming for like a stay-at-home moms. They're lonely. They don't know their purpose. They don't feel connected to the world anymore. And I imagine it can be a lonely world. Hanging out with kids is great, but you know, you need a different kind of community around you and also to still remember your purpose on the planet. I had a guy who lost his voice and we got his voice back. So he had a bit of a throat issue. He had like a very raspy voice. When he talked, it would be quite raspy. He didn't actually believe in his voice to be heard because he grew up in a family where it was more of a dictatorship type family. And this dictatorship type family didn't programmed his voice into him, so to speak. So he was living someone else's programming instead of his own, right? And so we had to go back, and a lot of it was around self-judging, putting himself down, judging himself, not believing in his voice. I'm sure there were some other things in there, but those were the main ones.
What age did you find his problem started?
His started at like 2.
Wow.
Because at 2, you're trying to kind of get your own voice out. So you start talking at 2 and 10 years old, you're kind of growing into the human you want to be and you're getting programmed. And so those years are crucial. And for any parent that's watching this one day and they're like, I screwed up my kids, you did not screw up your kids. You can still go in and exchange your own patterns and relate differently to your children even today. It's never too late. And that's part of their journey too. And you can suggest for them to eventually do their patterns. I must say, though, I don't take on anyone younger than the age of 25 because generally they haven't had enough experiences yet. And 2, their brain might not be fully developed till around 20.
I was about to ask you if you work with teenagers.
I do a teenagers program, but I only do the epigenetic body types to help them understand their purpose and their values. I don't go into patterns at that time. And
so it's better when their parents do the program and that would affect their energy.
Yes. I've done groups to see what works well in groups and what doesn't. I've had great success in groups actually. And I've even incorporated it with like someone did a breathwork ceremony while I was saying the patterns to people. So there's ways, you know, we can all collaborate and make it more powerful for people to receive the information. There was a lady who took this information and she uses it in her hypnotherapy sessions. So she puts her tools on top of it. So the way I see this work is it's a baseline tool and people can take it and use it how they want to. And that's what it's meant for, really. Take it and how they use it with their people and how their people understand them and relate to them. It's not up to me to be like, you have to do it this way. It's like, take it and make it your own because that's going to resonate more with your community.
Yeah, and it's a deep work and we all need it. If people are interested, how they find a practitioner?
We have 2 things happening at the moment. First of all, we launched an Instagram channel, which is amazing. It's LifeLift Community. And I'm laughing because I like chatting with people one-on-one, but social media, I'm like, what? I got to go on social media, you know? Someone just reminded me the other day, they're like, Anne, were you around when like ICQ was around and like MSN Messenger? And I'm like, yes, I liked that. It's like text message to me. So I have a wonderful social media team now, and they're growing our Instagram page. And so we're putting a lot of new information up on there. What people can dive into is either their own personal development if they're not a practitioner. And we have something called the LifeLift Lounge, where they go in and they're just going to dive into information. They'll get a little bit of the repatterning work in there as well to start, but I really believe that they need to link up with a practitioner who's done this and do the deeper work with somebody, because there's going to be things that one may not see or want to see in themselves sometimes. So it's really important to have that link. And then I do have that 12-week practitioners program going through, which right now we were only allowing in, certified practitioners, really, if they were functional med and so on. Recently, I've had a few coaches apply. And so we're just doing our due diligence on if it's the right fit right now, and asking people who we know really want to understand this work and use this work to come into the program. It's absolutely wonderful. And we give a little bit of a business model as well on the side. I literally go through what's worked and what hasn't, and then what practitioners I've trained around the world who are using this now and how it's working for them. I think has to be some practicality in how to apply it and even talk to people about this topic that's a little bit new and foreign to them.
And the trauma work is so huge now. People go more and more deeper in the trauma work. And I think that would be one of the ways to benefit people who want to heal trauma.
Yeah, we had a somatic practitioner apply, and she does a lot of, somatics work and is really willing and open to go deeper with the people. Sometimes someone will know their pattern, but then sometimes it's so painful for them to go there that as a practitioner, you have to support them on that journey, right? And there's going to be tears and stuff coming up, but that's okay. It's old energy coming out. And having those qualified practitioners in there who are trusted, there has to be trust in that for me, especially if I'm giving this program out to people. A lot of trust, I think, has been lost in the practitioner-patient relationships. And so it's about recreating that, and then also giving people this new door in a very safe way, a safe and secure way for them to go on this journey. So there's those two things that I really wanted to have bringing those practitioners through.
Anything else that you would like to tell the listener that we didn't cover?
Dr. Larisa, we covered a heck of a lot. I guess everything has a timing and a place, right? And there's no coincidences. And I've learned that. And the last thing I just want to leave people with is, if they did manage to listen to this and get through it all and start writing some notes and saying, wow, I'm kind of interested in doing this, then it's for you. If you're sitting there saying, wow, this work is just too much for me and so on, and I'm not ready yet, that's okay. But ask yourself why. Right. And know that it's there to help you and guide you through it. There doesn't have to be fear around this. There's lots of wonderful practitioners like you, myself, and even the ones I'm training who are going to be equipped to guide you through it, even if there is some fear behind that. And thanks for having me.
Great message, deep work, and I'm so appreciate you for doing all this and training other practitioners to do this deep work. We all need it in our world and create better people.
I agree. And thanks for what you do too.
Are you ready for your Energy for Life bioenergetic nest scan? Dr. Larisa Sharapova and myself, Priscilla Koblenz, offer personal, private, 90-minute consults to get you back to optimal health and well-being. And starting in the new year, we're offering an Energy Mastery Program, a monthly membership which will give you access to a monthly scan as well as 2 group masterclasses to help you optimize your wellness in the new year. For more details, visit the show notes or check out harmonicalignment.co. We hope you enjoyed today's episode of Harmonic Alignment. If something resonated with you, we would love to hear about it. Please consider leaving us a 5-star review and subscribing so you don't miss an upcoming episode. Thank you. The information contained in this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and not intended for the purpose of diagnosing, treating, curing, or preventing any disease. Before using any products referenced on the podcast, consult with your healthcare provider. Carefully read all labels and directions. The products and information received through the podcast should not be used to replace a consultation or advice from your healthcare provider. If you suspect you have a medical problem or have any healthcare questions, please promptly call your healthcare provider. This podcast, including Dr. Larisa Sharapova and Priscilla Koblenz and the producers, are not responsible for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained in this podcast. This podcast may contain endorsements and advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct financial benefit to the product or services referenced.